Oh, looks like Segovia was here.
Eh? You have to feel all that. Exactly. Let the sound.
At the master classes in Santiago de Compostela, Segovia and the students seem to have covered an enormous section of the repertory. And as producer of his recordings for many years, I recorded many of these pieces. And I think early on when he performed Bach and the Chaconne, that it was criticized by certain musicologists and the public. Why play this on the guitar? That it was not a piece for the guitar.
It was not, of course, and Segovia entered the Sancta Sanctorum of the musicians, and but he did it with love, and he took that instrument and made it sound like its real home was the guitar. I think there has been a cultural revolution in the performance of Bach's music, and the freedom and the love with which Segovia played it are no longer the most important thing, unfortunately.
Ilya? It is not necessary to play it. It is a little too quick. The pianist play it quicker, but it's not correct because it is a Spanish thing. Yeah. It's like a little tonadilla from the 18th century. Then if you it's sufficient. Sound in the hall. The other no. The three will not sound.
Yeah.
You know, in a concert hall.
Yes.
It's very loud.
How does it feel watching yourself after all these years?
I wish I could go right back into it. It's like seeing your hometown, you know. After you've been away for a long time, you see everything, you hear everything, you recognize the sounds, you recognize the ideas. And the things I was doing there were so immature.
Was the experience of just listening to him demonstrate and being exposed to how he grappled with the instrument and the music
All of
as
that.
important as whatever he might have said to you technically? Or
sometimes even more important,
Yeah.
because the words, you know, fly. And the things we see, I used to watch his hands, his motion, his movements, the way he would reach the strings, the way he would get things. All of this in a contemplative manner, without critical eye. And I would absorb from that because I was ready to do so. I was there, and it was my time to learn. And it was his time to teach. At the time, I was seeing these passages as technical feats, like I had to get through those things, and I was worried when it came. And what he taught me to do was something that developed many years later, was to just love them. See what I mean?
Beautiful.
It's a conversation. You're talking, you're telling a story, and the story is beautiful. It has nothing to do with technical feats. For me, it was whether I loved it or not. And when the music is loved, it lives.
It does. Beautiful.
But of course, not all the lessons were a matter of love.
No te va a picar. ¿Por qué suprimir eso? Para que todo... ¿Qué manía tenéis? Yo no soy amigo de los portamentos, pero hay algunos que son absolutamente esenciales para la guitarra.
Why suppress that? I am not friend of portamentos, but this should be done because in the guitar might sound better than in any other instrument. Let's see what there is contrary to aesthetics. It is like the voice when a note is prolonged or runs through a thread. Are you going to suppress the voice that has the note? Let us say, like this.
Y eso es menos fastidioso que esto. ¿Comprende? Porque estás en la misma cuerda y no te varía la posición de la mano derecha. Ahora sí. ¿No puedes recogerte un poquito más el puño para adentro? Is a little more animado. Do you know, it's very difficult for me to explain that in English, but the nuances and the rhythm is the result of the lack of respect that we have for the rhythm.
Oh, I don't understand.
Do you know? Very difficult. Will you please tell her that the nuances in the rhythm comes from the delicate lack of respect that we may have for the rhythm. But in this lack of respect, you may define the good artist and the bad artist.
Is what he's saying is saying that in order to be faithful to the nuances, to the beauties of rhythm, you have to sometimes disrespect rhythm itself.
The strict rhythm.
Right.
Yes,
Get the
yes.
spirit rather than the word.
And there's no one who could bend the phrase with more logic than he could,
Right.
really.
I think that what he did was very important. He did that through the use of the instrument, the guitar. He found that the guitar had its best way of speaking in that way. Didn't have. If he were a violinist or another instrumentalist or a conductor, he wouldn't
He
have.
might have done it differently.
Might have done quite differently. Because the guitar does not have the sound that lasts all over. The violin can mold the sound and have it grow in time as he wants, but the guitar goes down. So you have to impress the idea of the sound before it dies and make it last in the memory. So it's a matter of art, really, to work so that the elements of the composition will come at the right time in the proper order of importance, not of time.
My cradle was Linares, one of the wealthiest Andalusian villages, if not the prettiest and more picturesque. Everything is quiet, poetic, and deep. The streets are narrow and winding. The houses are built close together like old women who help each other to support the weight of centuries. I was born in the house number 74 of Corredera Street. Next to it, as a preordination of my destiny, there was a guitar shop.
Segovia told me that he learned to play the guitar because, first of all, he had a weird childhood, and his parents virtually gave him away. They felt apparently that they couldn't give him an upbringing, and he had an uncle and aunt that took him in. But he was 4 years old, so he was conscious of the fact that he had been sort of abandoned. His uncle he liked very much, and his uncle sheltered him and made him feel comfortable. And he told me that his uncle at one time held him in his arms and sang a song to him that involved strumming a guitar. He didn't have a guitar, but he'd go like the guitar. And that seemed to mean something to Segovia. And it planted an interest, and a short while after that, he saw a man in the street playing a guitar, probably flamenco. I don't know what that was. But that started an obsession that lasted 90 years, because if he was 4, and he lived to be 94, so he had a 90-year obsession with the guitar. And he was discouraged at first, because his family said if he was interested in music, that he should be seriously interested in something like the violin, which didn't appeal to him at all. The guitar was his obsession. And so he had to sort of do in secret what he wanted to do, and there was a local instrument maker that allowed him to pay for a guitar out of his allowance over a long period of time, and then he had to kind of hide what he was doing, and it was at a neighbor's that he'd go to practice.
I came into existence in Linares. In Granada, I opened my eyes to the beauty of nature and art. Many civilizations, the Moorish above all, left in Granada magnificent testimonies of their former sway. I lived at that time with my grandmother, and from the window of my bedroom, I could see the profile of the Alhambra. On hot nights in the spring, I would spend hours there in quiet contemplation. The beauty of those monuments are forever enhanced by the natural splendor of the surrounding countryside. The Arabs knew how to use this richness, for with it, they not only fertilized the soil to make it bring forth plants and flowers, but gave to Granada a murmuring soul which can be heard singing gently in the night. The rippling voice of the water sounds everywhere in Granada, but in no spot more melodiously than in the woods of the Alhambra.
When I was a boy, I used to spend hours there, listening in ecstasy. My whole soul was resonant with music. In Granada, I gave my first concert. It happened in 1909. I was 16 years old. The review of my concert next day opened a new world before me. I decided to be the apostle of the guitar. I put a firm foot on land and began to walk toward my future.
Classic guitar playing at the time when Segovia was a very young man was quite sparse. There was in Barcelona, I think is where Tárrega lived. Tárrega did play classical music on guitar, and Segovia aspired to meet him. Never did meet him, as a matter of fact, because in 1909, when Segovia made his debut in Granada, was the year that Tárrega died. So also there was some partisanship about whether playing nails should be long or short, and Segovia was in favor of having nail to give a crisper sound, and those who followed Tárrega thought it was anathema. You had to have the nails very short. Segovia finally made his debut in Madrid. He was 18 years old, and that was, I think, 1912. And then he toured the rest of the country, and by 1920 he had left Spain and did some touring. He went to South America and whatnot. A few years later, he met the composer Manuel Ponce, who wrote some sonatas and some other things for Segovia, and that enriched the guitar literature available to him. It was 1924 when he made his debut in Paris, and he was encouraged to do so by Pablo Casals, the great cellist. And that was a great success because he had premiered a piece that had been written by Albert Roussel, and it was called Segovia. And there were a lot of distinguished people in the audience at that time, including Claude Debussy's wife, Madame Debussy, and Manuel de Falla was in the audience also. So that was probably a very nervous time for him, but it was very successful. By then he knew that he really had it made at that time. I think Segovia, in the next few years, really became an international figure on the concert stage. And bear in mind, this was on an instrument that had been played in taverns only prior to that. He brought it to international attention that instrument could play classical music if you knew how to do it. And he toured all over Europe, including concerts that he did in Moscow and Leningrad. He came to the United States in 1928 and did a concert in Town Hall in New York. Olin Downs, a music critic for the New York Times, described his playing as consummate musicianship. A year after his debut in New York, this would have been 1929, he went to the Orient, and he made a great impression there. He really, considering also how arduous travel was in those days, it must have taken him some time to get to those places. But he went to Manila, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo, and other cities in Japan. He visited heads of state. He was honored by everybody from President Carter to Pope John Paul II. From Oxford University, from many other universities, he received honorary degrees in music. He toured virtually every country in the world. He finally did realize that dream that he set out. Ever since he was a young man in Spain, he wanted to become the apostle of the guitar, as he said, and he really did that because he expanded the literature with his own transcriptions of many classic works. And, of course, there were other works that outstanding composers supplied for him. Composers like Castelnuovo Tedesco, Villalobos, Torroba, Turina, and the literature was greatly expanded then. And he toured major cities again and again. He was always welcome back, and he played for audiences that packed concert halls, really all over the world.
I think my generation is the last that will have seen Segovia perform live. When we're all gone, the records will still be there, and the records will be a very important calling card, not only showing us what Segovia did, what Segovia's sound and style was, and what his repertory was, but also telling us a lot about the performance style of his time. Segovia saw recordings as very useful things. They weren't just vanity productions. If you look at the 27 recordings he made for HMV between 1927 and 1939, his first body of recordings, you see that there are a few, and a very few, instances of classical guitar pieces composed for the guitar in the 19th century. For instance, Sohr's Mozart variations. The war cut Segovia's early recording career short. In the mid-1940s, however, he began recording again for the Musicraft label, a small American firm, which allowed him to record one of his big projects, the Bach Chaconne. In the late 1940s, he began recording for the American Decca label. At first, he continued recording for LP in very much the same way he recorded for 78, short pieces, usually single movements. In 1956, he began working with a Decca producer named Israel Horowitz. Suddenly, Segovia was recording complete multi-movement sonatas, the Ponce sonatas, for instance. Unfortunately, it was around that time that Decca was sold to MCA. MCA had decided to specialize largely in rock recordings, although they did keep some of their classical discs, including the Segovia discography, in their catalog. But Segovia announced at the time that he didn't want anything to do with hippies, and that he would therefore not record for Decca any further. He hated it, and he never stopped hating it, and he never stopped disliking the electric guitar. And he considered that electrifying the guitar robbed the instrument of its poetry. Once in the mid-60s, the Beatles were at Heathrow Airport in London ready to tour the United States, and they were asked by a journalist what they thought of Segovia. George Harrison, the Beatles' lead guitarist, said, "Segovia, he's the daddy of us all." Later, Harrison's comment was reported to Segovia, and Segovia said, "Daddy of them all, they're not even my illegitimate children, they play the electric guitar." Segovia regarded television in very much the same way he regarded recordings. He saw television as a way of bringing his instrument, his art, and the music he loved to a large audience.
From the world of the concert stage, Andres Segovia.
Many of Segovia's colleagues among classical musicians early in television's history stayed away from TV because they were afraid that performing on popular variety programs, for instance, might in some way demean their art. Segovia didn't see it that way. He saw it as a way of reaching as many people as he could. In 1967, he also was the host of a program filmed at the Prado Museum in Madrid with Victoria de Los Angeles and Alicia de la Rocha. So those two and Segovia all performed in the film, and some of the art masterpieces that were at the Prado were shown.
Good evening. I am Andres Segovia, and this is the Prado. I have visited the Prado since I was a boy. And like many other Spaniards, I know my way around it as well as my own home. There are more than 3,000 artworks in this great museum. And it is a deep Spanish satisfaction that not one was brought here by force or plunder. The masterpieces of more than 100 artists, Tintoretto, Botticelli, Rubens, Titian, Bosc, were all acquired peacefully, bought or commissioned by Spanish kings and their agents. Of course, we can show but a few of these treasures, and so we have chosen those that tell us most about Spain. We shall bring here tonight noble music to complement great art. We shall see and hear of Spanish pride, strength, and reverence.
Andres Segovia plays the first movement of Tarova's Sonatina. It's been said that Enrique Granados composed this glorious tonadilla for the maja, this Spanish version of beauty and loveliness. She has inspired music, poetry, plays, and much conjecture as to the relationship of Goya to this mysterious lady.
In 1979, he played a concert at the White House that was broadcast nationally on PBS.
Good afternoon from the White House, where Vice President Mondale is hosting a recital by the great Spanish guitarist Andres Segovia.
I recall in a concert that Segovia was doing, he would come out on stage, and this was a trick of his, and it was wonderful, because he'd come out on stage and he'd sit down and the audience would get sort of quiet. And he'd wait till they got a little more quiet. And then he'd kind of bend over the guitar, and he'd form some kind of a chord, and he'd bend over and he'd just go like this with his hand. He'd go. And you realized you hadn't heard anything. So then the audience got more quiet, and then he'd start. I remember something very fondly, really, when Segovia was well over 80, and this was a good dozen years before his death. I saw him at the, I can't remember the name of the auditorium, on Nob Hill in San Francisco, across from the cathedral. Again, a packed audience, and he played encore after encore because they kept calling him out. And finally he came out, he played one more number, and then he said to the audience, he said, "I would be happy to play for you all night." He said, "but the guitar is a fragile instrument and needs its rest." And then he turned around and left, and everybody understood then that he really wanted to leave. But he satisfied the audience by playing many encores. I remember that Segovia came into the Metropolitan Museum to donate 2 guitars of his to the museum, and we all thought that maybe he was going to play a little something on one of them. But he didn't, and I suppose in a way that added to the dignity of the occasion, because those instruments are in the museum, they are silent now. It was a very moving ceremony, because you realized that these instruments had meant a lot to him, and now they mean a lot to the people who come to the museum and can gaze upon them. The instruments were being retired. The maestro most certainly was not.
I invite all of you to my next concert.
One of the things while I was in Spain, doing this 2020 segment on Segovia, I had the honor of, I wanted to buy a guitar. I had had 2 guitars destroyed in a flood in my Arizona home. And I told Segovia about this and asked him what might be a good guitar to buy. And finally I wound up with the privilege of having Segovia select a guitar for me. And the way we did that was, we had, I think one came from another shop, but 2 from Ramirez in downtown Madrid. Sent them over to Segovia's studio, and a guy came over in what was like a Brinks truck or something, and brought these up, and Segovia played on each of them, and then recommended one for me that he thought was the best, had the best tone, and I have that documented, so that because it has an added value for me, and if I ever did resell it, which I probably won't, but this is the Ramirez that Segovia picked out for me. We had that on camera, and that was part of the piece. His 94th birthday party was in February, I believe, and we filmed this thing in March. And we attended that birthday party, and here was Segovia, now 94 years old, and he ate everything in sight, and he was up till all hours of the night, and guitarists from all over the world, including men like Alirio Diaz, were present. And every time a lady would come in, Segovia insisted on standing up, and he would kiss her hand in the continental fashion. And he was sort of the life of the party. And I said, what a way to celebrate your 94th birthday. I think when I was over there, I got a glimpse of why he was obsessed. And I think it had to do with the mix of cultures that is that part of Spain. Oh, even other parts, the Catalonian, but the Andalusian particularly, and the sound of that mixture of the Moorish influence and what Granada came to represent. You hear it in music like Manuel de Falla's Nights in the Gardens of Spain, which really was written for piano, but there's something about those two cultures as they mixed. It gave a flavor that must have been in the genes of a Segovia. And if he was obsessed with music, I can see how that music would appeal to him. And the guitar is a perfect instrument for that. And that's why I think all his life it meant so much to him to bring great music out of a guitar and to put the instrument on the pedestal that it has been ever since. The last public appearance that he made was in Miami Beach at the Theater for the Performing Arts. That was on April 4th of 1987. He had another concert upcoming later in the month at Carnegie Hall and flew back to New York for it, but he fell ill then and had to cancel that concert. And that was the first time he ever canceled a concert in his long career. Then he returned to Madrid, intending to come back to the United States later on when he recovered. But in Madrid on June the 3rd of 1987, he died.
I am very emotional because this is the studio, plenty of the life of the maestro and his presence here. I feel that he's here with prize, diplomas. He's here, he has worked the last 25 years of his life, working, preparing his programs, working in transcription and also in new things, new composition. He worked every day 6 hours. He begin maybe some days at 9:30. He practicing during 1 hour and a half. And after that, because he left, he get up very early in the morning, he made a little like that. And after that, he's resting and another 1 hour and a half. He come down, we have our apartment, to take a lunch. And after that, back again, practicing, reading, 1 hour and a half, practicing, rest a little bit, and another 1 hour and a half. And after that, it was 6 hours every day. Because he say, like you know, that when he stopped one day without practicing, he knows. The second day, he doesn't practice. The friends know. And the third day, everybody know that he's never practicing. This is the reason he works so hard. Really so hard. And for me, I have it because during 2 years, without his presence here, for me, is really emotional for me. And I'm so sorry that I don't have the vocabulary for explain that. But I don't know. And He has made many transcriptions here and prepared his concert, his programs every year, 3 or 4 different programs. And after that, at 8 o'clock, he received all the friends, writer, painter, musician. And he was his simple life, but very important life. And his legacy is universal. And I hope I try to continue his legacy. I hope, because he has good pupils, not very much, not too many, but I think the legacy of Andrés, he was continue forever.
Somebody once said that all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato. And I think we could say all classical guitar playing is a footnote to Segovia, because he's the person who really sketched out the parameters of everything that we are still trying to do today. He showed us that the repertoire really rightfully begins in the 1500s and goes right on up to the music of the present day. Many of the times when I've thought maybe I was doing something really new, all I was really doing was perhaps fleshing out a little bit some of the work that Segovia had already begun. I think the musicians in my generation are very often terrified, let's say, of missing one little note, technically. They're afraid if they make one little slip of the finger or one note doesn't come out right, that's the end of the world. But I think the musicians of my generation have much too much tolerance for something that's emotionally barren, something that where there's no atmosphere. That doesn't concern them nearly so much as the one little slip of the finger. And I think this is really a case where we have got to return to some of the great masters of the past, to the Fritz Kreislers, the Pablo Casals. Segovia was always making little changes in the music, but these little changes were always in the service of the composer. They always made the music sing more. They made the music communicate more. After knowing Segovia indirectly through his records and his concerts and the various books that were in print about him, I finally had the chance to meet him personally in early February of 1974. And this was really, of course, a great experience for me to actually knock on the door of a hotel room and have it be opened by Segovia. And the remarkable thing about him, I found, even at that age, where he was certainly over 80 years old, was that he was still very interested to know, what I'd been doing, and he gave me a lot of time, actually. And every year after that, when he would come to New York, he was always so generous with his time. And I think this was a very important aspect of his legacy, was his interest in young people, in young players. I had also known Segovia indirectly through his pupil and disciple Oscar Guilla, and also through Alirio Diaz, the wonderful Venezuelan virtuoso. And I had studied with both of them previously, before meeting Segovia. So here I was already sort of a grandchild of his, artistically, and then finally having the chance to meet him was was a great thing for me, a big thrill. One of the things that we were always trying to figure out was, how did Segovia get this incredible sound? And part of it was just, I think, was just physical, in that he had, of course, these perfect hands for the guitar. Interesting thing about his fingertips in the left hand was that they tapered here. These fingers looked like sausages, everybody said, but they tapered when they got to the end, so that he could play with a great deal of precision here. And of course, these thick pads that he had on the left hand, as well as the way that the fingertip came together with the fingernail in the right hand, gave him really the ideal set of hands, I suppose, for making beautiful music on the guitar. When I was a boy, the New York Times published in their Sunday magazine an article about Segovia, and I remember very well a drawing of Segovia in front of the guitar with his hand like this, and it was entitled Segovia Teaching the Guitar to Play Bach. When I was a boy, I must have listened to the little piece I'd like to play now in Segovia's recording thousands of times. This is the little prelude, originally for lute.